Gríma, or as he was later called, Wormtongue is often overlooked as a character, but his importance to the events in The Lord of the Rings is bigger than many know. Today, we explore the tragic story that was Gríma's life and analyze his importance as a character. Join me as we unravel the complex web of motivations, fears, and desires that transformed a man of Rohan into one of its greatest traitors, and examine how his tragic arc speaks to universal themes of loyalty, corruption, and redemption. Part 1. From Counselor to Corruptor. Born to Galmod, a nobleman of Rohan, Gríma grew up in the culture of the Rohirrim, a proud horselord society valuing strength, honor, and martial prowess. Unlike many Rohirrim, Gríma relied on his wit rather than physical strength. In a society that celebrated warriors, this distinction likely marked him as different from an early age, perhaps even an outsider within his own culture. What separated Gríma from other counselors was his remarkable gift for words, a silver tongue that could weave compelling arguments and present information in ways that subtly shaped the king's thinking. This talent for persuasion earned him not only the king's ear, but also his trust. Théoden, once a strong ruler, selected his advisors carefully, suggesting Gríma initially offered sound counsel. The pivotal moment in Gríma's tragic fall comes with his recruitment by Saruman the White. While the exact circumstances of their first meeting remain unclear, what emerges from Tolkien's text is that Saruman, master of persuasion himself, identified in Gríma a perfect agent for his plans. What did Saruman offer Gríma to secure his treachery? A powerful combination of incentives. First came wealth. The books mention that Gríma had been receiving payment from Saruman, gold that he hoarded in secret. Then there was power, the promise of greater influence, not just as an advisor, but potentially as a ruler of Rohan under Saruman's dominion. But perhaps most compelling was the promise of Éowyn, the king's niece. The books and films both highlight Gríma's obsession with her, a desire that Saruman skillfully manipulated. Saruman understood human weakness intimately and exploited Gríma's desires masterfully. The counselor's fall wasn't immediate but gradual, each small betrayal making the next easier, until he was thoroughly ensnared in the wizard's web. One interesting fact about Gríma's role in the story of The Lord of the Rings is that in the books, he was the one to reveal the location of the Shire to the Nazguls. Thus, he can be seen as one of the key figures at start of the events of The Lord of the Rings and at the end of The Lord of the Rings, where he ultimately took Saruman's life. Part 2. The Poisoning of Rohan. What makes Gríma's betrayal particularly tragic is the intimate nature of his treachery. Unlike battlefield enemies, he destroyed Théoden from within, a daily, methodical poisoning of both body and mind. The old king no longer left his chambers, and all speech with him was through Gríma, who conveyed his commands to people far removed from the king's presence. Gríma systematically isolated Théoden, controlling what information reached the king and how it was presented. He fed Théoden's fears about his failing health and aging body, while simultaneously administering remedies that likely contained substances to weaken the king further. He whispered poisonous counsel that emphasized Rohan's weakness and the futility of resistance against rising threats. When reports of Saruman's orcs raiding the Westfold reached Edoras, Gríma downplayed them or twisted them to suggest that confrontation would only lead to Rohan's destruction. One of Gríma's most effective tactics was the systematic isolation of those who posed threats to his influence. Éomer became a particular target of Gríma's machinations. When Arma pressed for action against the growing threat from Isengard, Gríma countered with accusations of warmongering and recklessness. He planted seeds of doubt about Alma's loyalty in Théoden's mind, eventually leading to Alma's imprisonment, a masterful elimination of one of the few individuals who saw through Gríma's deception. Similarly, Gríma worked to isolate Éowyn, keeping her bound to the increasingly grim halls of Meduseld as her uncle's caretaker, while simultaneously making unwanted advances toward her. Under Gríma's malign influence, the proud house of Ewell, the royal line of Rohan, fell into its darkest hour. The Golden Hall of Meduseld, once a place of light, feasting and song, became somber and silent. Military discipline deteriorated as conflicting orders emerged from Meduseld. Rohan's cavalry units received contradictory commands, with Gríma countermanding orders that would have strengthened Rohan's borders against Saruman's forces. Perhaps most devastating was the impact on the common people of Rohan. Villages in the Westfold were left vulnerable to raids by Saruman's orcs and wild men from Dunland. Refugees streamed toward Edoras, only to find little help from their once protective king. All this suited Saruman's plans perfectly. A weakened Rohan could not resist his coming assault, and Gremer had made it possible without a single wizard spell being cast directly upon the kingdom. Through one man's betrayal, an entire culture teetered on the brink of extinction. Part 3: Exposure and Exile. The turning point in Gríma's tragic arc arrives with Gandalf's timely intervention. After Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Gandalf arrive at Edoras, they find it transformed into a place of shadows and whispers. In this pivotal scene, Gríma's years of careful manipulation unravel within minutes. He attempts to prevent Gandalf from bringing his staff into the king's presence, recognizing the threat the wizard poses to his control, but fails. What follows is one of the most dramatic moments in The Lord of the Rings. Gandalf, revealing himself as Gandalf the White, casts down Gríma's influence and heals Théoden from his manufactured malady. The king emerges from his stupor, stands tall again, and recognizes the betrayal that has occurred under his very nose. In the book, Théoden's first impulse is righteous wrath. He casts Gríma out, giving him the choice between riding to war to prove his loyalty or exile. In one of the most revealing moments of his character, Gríma chooses to flee rather than seek redemption through honorable action. He crawls away from Meduseld toward what he believes is safety in Isengard. This moment of exposure strips away Gríma's power and position in an instant. All his carefully constructed influence crumbles, revealing him as what he has become: a spy, a traitor, and a tool of Saruman. His public humiliation completes his transformation from respected counselor to reviled worm, scuttling away from the light of truth. Following his expulsion from Edoras, Gríma flees to what he believes will be a sanctuary, Isengard, the stronghold of his true master Saruman. When Gríma finally reaches Isengard, however, he finds not the welcoming power center he expected, but a ruin. The Ents had unleashed their fury upon Saruman's fortress, flooding and destroying much of it. This scene underscores a cruel irony in Gríma's story. He betrayed Rohan for promises of power and position in Saruman's new order, only to find that order crushed before it could truly begin. The mighty wizard to whom he had pledged his loyalty now stands diminished, his armies scattered or destroyed. Part 4: Humiliation and Hatred. One of the most revealing moments in Gríma's story occurs at the confrontation outside Wormtongue, when the victorious forces of Rohan and their allies meet with the defeated Saruman. This scene offers a window into Gríma's deteriorating mental state and relationship with Saruman. In Tolkien's text, Saruman attempts to use his persuasive voice to divide his enemies, nearly succeeding before Gandalf breaks his staff and strips him of his position in the Order of Wizards. Throughout this exchange, Gríma remains hidden inside Orthanc, only his shadow occasionally visible at a high window. The dynamic between master and servant has clearly shifted. In a telling moment, Théoden offers Gríma a chance at redemption. "You need not follow him. I know of your service to Saruman, but you have been deceived. Come down, and your life will be spared." This represents a remarkable act of mercy from a king whom Gríma had nearly destroyed. For a brief moment, we see Gríma consider this option, a flicker of his former self perhaps wanting to return to his people despite his crimes. Saruman, however, mocks this offer, and Gríma himself, revealing the contempt he has always held for his servant. The wizard describes how he kicked and beat Gríma, treating him as less than human. This public humiliation seals something in Gríma. His hatred for Saruman crystallizes, though he lacks the immediate courage to act upon it. The seeds of his final violent act are planted in this moment of ultimate degradation. After their defeat at Orthanc, Saruman and Gríma become wanderers. Their path eventually leads them to the Shire, Tolkien's beloved Hobbit homeland. This conclusion, omitted from Peter Jackson's films, but crucial to Gríma's character arc, represents his ultimate breaking point and desperate final act. After Sauron's defeat, Saruman, now calling himself Sharky, and Gríma have secretly corrupted and industrialized the Shire through agents over many months. When Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin return and lead a Hobbit uprising against this tyranny, they confront Saruman and Gríma at Bag End. Part 5. The Final Act. By this point, Gríma has been reduced to a wretched state, described as so thin and hungry-looking that the hobbits pity him. Saruman reveals that Gríma has resorted to cannibalism, having killed and eaten Lotho Sackville Baggins, who had been serving as Saruman's puppet leader in the Shire. This horrific detail shows how completely Gríma has been corrupted and dehumanized. Yet even in this degraded state, when Frodo offers him freedom from Saruman, a spark of his old self flickers. "Worm, you miserable rat," Saruman cries before striking him. This final humiliation becomes the breaking point. In what becomes his final act, Gríma pulls a hidden knife and cuts Saruman's throat before being shot down by a hobbit archers. A violent end to a life defined by increasingly desperate choices. Tolkien writes, "It was fitting that his mean little soul should have run out in the twilight." But there is something almost redemptive in Gríma's final violence. He kills not for Saruman, but against him, his last independent act being one that rids Middle-earth of a fallen wizard who had caused so much suffering, including his own. Part 6. Understanding Gríma, the deeper significance. Gríma Wormtongue transcends the simple role of villain to become one of Tolkien's most complex character studies. His significance extends far beyond his plot functions, offering profound insights into human nature and the themes that define Tolkien's work. The corruption of potential. At his core, Gríma represents the corruption of potential. Born a man of Rohan with gifts of intelligence and persuasion, he could have used these talents to strengthen his kingdom. Instead, weakness, resentment, and ambition led him down a darker path. Unlike beings like orcs or the Nazgûl, who are corrupted by external dark powers, Gríma's fall is distinctly human. A series of moral compromises that gradually erode his humanity. This speaks to Tolkien's nuanced understanding of evil. Unlike Sauron, who represents abstract malevolence, Gríma embodies the banality of evil, how ordinary human weaknesses can lead to extraordinary betrayal when cultivated by the right manipulator. The power of words as weapons. Gríma's role as the corrupted advisor connects him to a literary tradition, extending back to Shakespeare's Iago and beyond. His nickname Wormtongue evokes both the serpent in Eden and the image of words as worms that burrow into the mind and rot it from within. In modern political contexts, we might see Gríma as representing propagandists or those who use misinformation to shape public opinion. His techniques, isolating his target, controlling information flow, sowing doubt about loyal supporters, mirror tactics used by manipulators throughout history. Tolkien, having lived through 2 world wars and witnessed the rise of totalitarianism, understood how dangerous words could be when wielded by those with malicious intent. Gríma demonstrates how language itself can become weaponized, a theme that resonates perhaps even more strongly in our information-saturated age. The rejection of redemption. One of the most profound aspects of Gríma's story is how it highlights the moral superiority of compassion over vengeance. Throughout his arc, Gríma receives multiple offers of mercy that he ultimately rejects. When Théoden is freed from Gríma's influence, his first impulse is rage. Understandably so. Yet at Gandalf's counsel, he offers Gríma a choice rather than summary execution. Later, at Orthanc, he again extends an opportunity for Gríma to return to his people despite his betrayal. Finally, Frodo, who understands suffering and corruption better than most, offers Gríma freedom from Saruman's abuse. These moments of offered grace stand in stark contrast to Saruman's cruelty toward his servant. They represent Tolkien's belief that compassion, not power, reveals true strength of character. The heroes of Middle-earth prove their heroism not just through battlefield prowess, but through mercy extended even to those who don't deserve it. Gríma's inability to accept these offers highlights how corruption can trap individuals in cycles of self-destruction. His tragedy lies not just in his initial fall, but in his repeated rejection of paths back to community and redemption, a psychological prison partly of his own making. The psychology of the outsider. Looking deeper into Gríma's psychology offers some of the richest insights into his character. Though Tolkien doesn't provide explicit psychological analysis, the details of Gríma's behavior suggest a complex internal landscape. Gríma likely suffered from profound insecurity and self-loathing. In a culture that celebrated physical strength and martial expertise, his gifts lay elsewhere, in words and political maneuvering. This difference may have generated feelings of inadequacy and resentment that Saruman exploited. His obsession with Éowyn suggests a desire not just for her beauty, but for what she represents. The nobility and grace of Rohan that he feels excluded from. His attempts to possess her mirror, his larger attempts to control a society where he feels marginalized. Throughout his arc, Gríma displays signs of what modern psychology might identify as cognitive dissonance, the mental stress that results from holding contradictory beliefs or values. Part of him likely still identified as a man of Rohan, even while betraying it. This internal conflict manifests in his hesitation when offered chances at redemption, and his conflicted loyalty to Saruman. Conclusion. The universal tragedy. We find in his story a tragedy that transcends the boundaries of Middle-earth and speaks to universal human experiences. Gríma's fall reminds us that evil rarely announces itself with dramatic flourishes. Instead, it often begins with small compromises, moments of weakness, and the quiet erosion of principles. His story warns that the distance between respected counselor and reviled traitor might be shorter than we imagine. Yet Tolkien doesn't present Gríma as a monster, but as a man. One whose choices, however damning, remain recognizably human. In this, there lies an uncomfortable mirror. How many of us might make similar compromises under the right pressures? How easily might resentment, desire, or ambition lead any of us astray? The repeated offers of mercy extended to Gríma, though rejected, speak to Tolkien's deeply held belief in the possibility of redemption. Even in his final moments, had Gríma chosen differently, another path might have opened before him. This persistent opportunity for moral choice, present until our final moments, stands as one of Tolkien's most hopeful messages. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Gríma's story is how it illustrates that freedom and dignity require courage. Each time Gríma chooses safety over honor, security over integrity, he loses another piece of his humanity. By the end, he has become the worm his name suggests, crawling in the dirt, having surrendered his chance to stand tall among his people. In a modern world where compromise and moral relativism often prevail, our choices, especially the small, seemingly inconsequential ones, ultimately define us. His tragedy is not that he was born evil, but that, step by step, he chose to become what he ultimately was. Thank you for joining me by the fire tonight, on this exploration of one of Middle-earth's most complex tragic figures. If you appreciated this analysis, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into Tolkien's world and the timeless lessons it offers us.